Hi, my name is Lee Noble, and I want to talk to you just for a few moments about critical thinking and how it is a forgotten concept. And it's a forgotten concept in schools today, in our education system. I'm talking high schools and I'm talking middle schools. Okay? And the reason I say it's forgotten is we have a system that is oriented towards the sciences and the maths. Alright? And that's fine. That's fine. But the problem is that in math, an equation like 2 plus 2 is going to equal 4 every time. And in science, the component is H2O. It's going to be the components for water every single time. There is a right and there are a lot of wrongs, but there's one single right. Okay, now let's look at another category. All right, another discipline. Let's look at history. History doesn't fit into that, yet because of our system, it's being forced into that. All right, but there are more than one right answer for all of different history's questions. All right, there's a lot of right answers. It depends on what perspective you come from. And there's a lot of theories out there that could be right that we just don't know. And all those require critical thinking, and that's why it's so important to give that attribute to students today. Now, what does critical thinking do and why is it important? It helps people uncover bias and prejudice. Textbooks, I use them. I was a teacher for 25 years. I love textbooks. But you know what? They're filled with bias and prejudice by the writers. And if we just teach what's in the textbooks or what's in the beliefs of the instructor, then we're teaching kids to be robots. We're teaching them to believe exactly what we believe. All right? And we're not necessarily that's not necessarily the only right. All right? There's a lot of other rights. So, what does critical thinking also do? It enables us to distinguish between fact and opinion. And that's the biggest part. We want them to read our textbooks and see, okay, that's a fact. This is an opinion that's directing my perspective. We want them to form their own perspective. We want to give them varied opinions so they can form their own judgments. Okay, the facts are important. We need to give them the facts, but how they interpret the facts, that's where critical thinking comes in. Okay, and here's why critical thinking is important. It's not only important for students when they're in high school, it's important when they move on and become young adults. It's important when they become adults because critical thinking is required for reasoning, evaluating, problem solving, decision making, analyzing. All of these areas are vitally important, and the only way you attain that skill is through critical thinking. So now we're starting to see why it's important, right? Okay, well, why critical thinking in the classroom? Well, because one, obviously I just said, it's a skill that must be learned. Two, all content to be learned must be intellectually constructed. All right? Historical events, historical individuals. There's a lot of attributes about these people and these events that need to be kind of like a puzzle. They need to be put together. But how you put it together is different for every person. How they view it is different. These events, it really takes a lot of critical thought to figure out your own opinion. Now, what we're doing is we're giving them historical statistics and dates. And we're saying, memorize this, this is the answer. Well, that's fine. But the problem is, who cares? Who really cares? Do we really care how many people died during World War II? No, but you know what's funny? I've seen that question on tests. Do we really care what date Thomas Jefferson was born? No, but I've seen that on tests. Is it more important to see why World War II took place? Is it more important to see what Thomas Jefferson did? Absolutely. Those things should be analyzed, not the specific numbers. We get too caught up in numbers and pretty soon we forget about all the other information, all the important information. And that's happening. So, why is critical thinking on the endangered list? First of all, look at this bottom line. Not the teacher's fault. I'm not saying any teacher out there, I'm not putting blame on you. All right? It's the system. What we're doing is we're teaching children not to be critical thinkers. We're asking them to follow directions and regurgitate, memorize information that is on state tests. Why? Because they need to pass those tests in order to graduate. Because the education system has said, here's a standardized test, they need to know these facts. So as teachers, because of things like paper performance, and we're judged on how our kids do, we end up sitting there and just teaching them a bunch of facts so they pass these tests. We're teaching to a test, which does not give them the critical thinking skills they need. All right? That's the problem. Results can be deceiving. We heard every year we hear, test scores are up, they're looking better, they're looking good, our kids are getting smarter. Are they really? Are they really getting smarter? I want you to think about that. Are our kids really learning more? Okay? I don't think so. And a lot of information I've seen backs me up. They're not smarter. What they're getting better at is answering specific questions that are directed towards a state or a national test. That's what they're getting better at. We're teaching them exactly what's on that test and nothing else. So we're not teaching them to be critical thinkers. We're teaching them to memorize. And you've seen it from kids. You've seen it when they walk into your class. That kid that walks in and he's talking to nobody. And what's he doing? What's he doing? He's remembering over and over again what he just learned in the hallway. And he sits down and you can't give him the test fast enough. He's like, give me the test, give me the test, give me the test. And then he writes down the answers real quick because he just memorized it in his short-term memory. He turns the test in, and as he's walking out that door, he forgot everything that was on that test. Because he only had to remember it for 15 seconds. That's it. That's the problem. There's no learning. It's memorizing. Okay? So, critical thinking activities in the classroom, they're difficult. I know. This is why we're not doing it. Like I said, not the teacher's fault. Okay? So what's the blame? Well, large classes. There's 40 kids in a class. In some states, there's 65 students in a classroom. How do you teach critical thinking skills to that? You can't. You're not going to have them in small groups. You're not going to have a discussion with 40 kids. It's impossible. It's impossible to have a long project in there with those amount of numbers. So, also there's increased curriculum requirements. All right? And I'm speaking from a history standpoint. Okay? It used to be teachers only had to teach through World War II. Then history teachers only had to teach through the Vietnam War. Well, it's 2012, soon to be 2013. What are we teaching now? There's been 30 years of history since the 1980s. Okay, we've gone through recessions, we've gone through depressions, gone through economic downturns, we've gone through terrorist attacks. 9/11. All right? There's been a lot of things that have happened. So that's piled on. Well, the more information that we have to teach, the less we can teach about the other stuff. Now, we can all say, oh, well, we'll just take some of that out. Okay, well, let's take out before 1800. Well, we wonder why people aren't voting, because they don't know the Constitution, because we didn't cover it. And a teacher will say, oh yeah, we covered that in the 4th grade. Our kids learned that in the 4th grade. That's not good enough. Or we say, you know what, we're going to start with the Reconstruction period of the Civil War. And then you try to explain to the kids, Reconstruction from what? Well, you should have learned in the 5th grade, or the 4th grade, or the 3rd grade all about the Civil War. No, it's too much information to teach them now. We don't have the time to spend a lot of time in these projects. And critical thinking also is not easy. And this is why. Critical thinking is hard intellectual work. All right? And it doesn't assure anyone of the truth. Okay? Think about that. There's a lot of things in history, we don't know if it's the truth. We go on documents we've read, but we got to fill in the blanks. And we have them fill it in and use our own critical thinking skills. Scientists do this. Professors do this. Archaeologists, anthropologists, they're using their deductive reasoning to put these together. Why can't students do that? They can. We just have to teach them how to do it. And they have to be motivated to do it. And like I said, it's hard work. It's hard work for the teacher. It's hard work for the student. Well, we live in the generation of YouTube. Okay? Power of video. Kids learn everything these days from video, whether it's from the computer or from YouTube or from some movie they see at the theater or from television. Okay, they learn it from that. That's how they get most of their information. They process it through there. They don't even read books anymore. They look at Kindle or things like that where they can read on those. They can look at they can view it more. Okay, it's more of a media. We're a multimedia society. It's the power of YouTube. Now these are great. These are great things to use in the classroom. But remember this. Very careful note. Kids, it's a positive effect on kids' behavior or a negative effect on kids' behavior depending on what we're showing them. So, what are we showing them in the classroom? We're showing them this. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the Discovery Channel. I love the History Channel. I love PBS. They show fantastic things. Now, I have kids that have come into my class and said, oh, I love watching the History Channel. Now, those are few and far between. Some kids will say it, but as long as their shows aren't on. Okay, then they'll turn to that. But why are these shows on PBS? Or on the History Channel? Or on the Discovery Channel? Who watches them? Adults. They're made by adults, for adults, starring adults. And then we're showing those in a classroom, a 60-minute documentary to kids that are made specifically for adults where we say, well, we don't understand why they fall asleep and they don't get it. I think they're great, but a kid doesn't. Or they get their information from Hollywood. Talk about distorting reality. I remember being a classroom teacher, having kids come in after JFK was shown. Mr. Noble, I know how Kennedy was assassinated. No, you don't. You know how Oliver Stone thought JFK was assassinated. We're not using critical thinking. The history they're getting is fabricated history. It's Hollywood history. So what do we do about that? How do we make up for that? This is what I did. I made a series called Cindy and Max Blast of the Past. Now, what was my motivation behind this? For those of you who remember Schoolhouse Rock. Schoolhouse Rock were these 5-minute little cartoons that were in between shows. Okay, on Saturday mornings. I'll tell you what, I guarantee everybody out there, if I mention what's a conjunction, you're putting that little song in your head about the railroad cars. Everybody knows Schoolhouse Rock. Well, kids today are more sophisticated. That's true. They're older at a younger age. So, Cindy and Max is my version of Schoolhouse Rock, in a history version. Okay, Cindy and Max are 2 kids. What they do is they go to different historical events, the locations of the events. They walk around and they discover, using these areas around there, using these different historical locations around these events, they get some of the information, all the background information they need to use their own deductive reason to come up with their own conclusions. Sometimes they suggest a few of them. But the kids, as they're watching, will form their own conclusions from this. It's a great motivational and educational tool because it inspires critical thinking and they learn without knowing they're learning. It's kids teaching kids. They're not listening to adults. It's a relationship with the characters because they can relate to them. It motivates thinkers and it motivates critical thinking skills from the kids. And the best part, they're 8 to 10 minutes in length because that's how long kids will pay attention in your classroom. They're not going to watch that 30, 40, 50-minute video. They'll watch this. Now, how is it being used today in the classroom? A lot of teachers are using them right now. And the reason they're using them is because they said they're an effective introduction to any American history unit they have. They show this, then they jump right in to what they're teaching. All right? That's why it's so effective. And as a bonus, there are critical thinking questions that come along with each episode. So as a teacher, you give them to the kids. You have them fill them out, you have them write an essay on it. Or you just discuss them. But the big thing is, instead of giving them a worksheet, instead of giving them a chapter review, instead of giving them something to read and saying, here, know this, and now we can jump into colonialism, and now we can jump into the American Revolution, or now we can jump into the Civil War, they've seen it. They've seen the John Brown raid at Harper's Ferry. They've seen Prohibition. They've seen Watergate. They've seen the Pilgrim's Landing. They've seen these things, and now they can go on and learn the material. It's critical thinking. It's a disappearing art in our schools today, you guys, and it's really important. It's being used by a bunch of teachers right now, Sydney and Max is. Please, critical thinking, if you buy this or use this, great. If you don't use this, fine, but come up with some critical thinking ideas in your classroom because history is so important. We're spending so much time teaching them the what and the result that we're forgetting about the most important concept in history, and that's the why. And if they don't learn about the why, how are we going to teach them not to make the mistakes that have been made before? Okay? Critical thinking is it. Good luck.